Look, man, I get it. Everybody is going out there in the comment section and talking about how this idea should not even be discussed. Lego, stop talking about this. Why do you keep on talking about this? Stop making these darn videos about this one topic, man. And I say it all the time. The reason I'm talking about this is because other people are freaking talking about it. This is not a news generation YouTube channel. I just go out there and react to stuff that's actually being talked about and ideas, discussions, and overall conversations that I find interesting. That's what this channel has always been. So yeah, I get it. Like, there's frustration that we keep on making videos about this topic, but every few days there happens to be some extra information that's like, oh, that's really interesting. I want to dive into that. So without further ado, this show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Go out there and check out the first link in the description to save some money on your VPN, get some free months, and support this YouTube channel all in the process. Today we are talking once more about Captain Canada himself. You know him, you love him, he is a Pittsburgh legend and an NHL legend. It's none other than Sid the Kid, Sidney freaking Crosby, baby. And we are discussing the idea once more of him heading to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, we are no strangers to this topic. We've discussed Crosby and the Habs at length multiple times. He was a Canadiens fan growing up. His dad was drafted by the Canadiens. He is, of course, from the Maritimes, Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia, and he is one of the best hockey players in the world still at 37 years old. His contract expires at the end of 2027, and he's in a spot where the Penguins are kinda bad right now. You can say, hey, if Sidney is on a team like Pittsburgh that's doing pretty poorly, why would he go to a Montreal Canadiens team that is, at the time of recording this audio, just slightly ahead of Pittsburgh in the standings? You would imagine he wants to go to a cup contender, he wants to compete for a championship again, but as we had discussed over multiple videos the past few weeks here, Sidney Crosby doesn't really need to cup chase, quote unquote. He's got 3 already. And we have seen the hypothesis tossed around there by folks like Josh Yohei, for example, saying that Sidney would probably go to a team like Vancouver over a team like Colorado, with the familiarity with some of the faces like Rutherford, Alvin, Tocchet, over being the second or third string guy behind McKinnon and Makar. Sidney Crosby is a guy who chases the highlights, he chases the narrative, he chases the story. And him heading over to a team like Montreal, even though he's not going to take the Canadiens to the promised land and win the cup with them in 2027 or whatever, the story is what matters here. The headline, what Crosby would mean to a Habs team that he had been cheering for as a child, that welcomed him with open arms in the Bell Center a few nights ago at the Four Nations, and that just would really, really eat up the idea of Sidney Crosby being on their team. Well, we had ourselves some extra commentary about the entire matter from one of Sidney Crosby's former teammates. Take a look at this post made on BPM Sports from earlier last week. It goes over some comments made by Derick Brassard. He spoke about Habs fans chanting out Crosby's name at the Bell Center and said this: "Sometimes that's how you recruit players. With this tournament, Crosby gets to visit the facilities and experience the atmosphere in Montreal. He grew up a Canadiens fan, so why not?" And normally I wouldn't go out there and highlight specific comments that are just this basic about a situation, but when you consider the fact that not only is this somebody who is in the know, for example, that would go out there and say something like this in the media, but it actually happens to be Sidney Crosby's old teammate, that's where you start to get me interested. Sure, we have had commentary from different Pittsburgh beat reporters and other folks from around the National Hockey League reporting world who have talked about this entire thing, but none of Crosby's former teammates have gone out there and said anything about this, to be honest. Now it's one, Derick Brassard, who did play against Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins in that 2017 Ottawa Senators playoff run. And then the next season, Brassard got traded over to Pittsburgh and played 14 games in the regular season and 12 in the playoffs with Crosby in that timeline. He then got sent over to Florida and then Colorado in the midst of that 2018-19 season. Yeah, he got sent away twice. It was kind of a bad year for Derick Brassard, and he inevitably found himself in New York, Arizona, Philadelphia, Edmonton, and Ottawa. Yeah, just look at the amount of gosh darn teams Derick Brassard found himself on from 2015-16 to 2022. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different teams in the span of 7 years. Derick Brassard was an absolute goat in Puckpedia back in the day. And I say back in the day as if Puckpedia isn't a game anymore. It still is. It's just not as popular anymore anyway. But Derick Brassard probably knows a thing or two as to how Sidney Crosby's mind operates. He happens to also be a player from the Eastern Canada area who did have some sort of a similar timeline of growing up with Sidney Crosby. Crosby, of course, 05 draftee, Derick Brassard, 06 draftee, both taken out of the QMJHL and both were QMJHL studs. So for Brassard to go out there and say, yeah, I mean, this is how you recruit a player. Montreal, the city, is going out there and welcoming this guy with their cries and their cheers. And that's how you get somebody like Crosby to bite. You welcome him everywhere. You make him feel like he is already home. And you plant that little seed in there that says, hey, Sid, if you come over to Montreal, we may not expect you to take this team to the promised land, but you will be the number one story. You will be the number one guy. You don't even need to take the captaincy away from Nick Suzuki, but Crosby is going to be that dude. Everybody is going to be focused on him. He will not be able to go to a restaurant outside without getting his bill paid for him by either another patron or the restaurant owners themselves. He will be a celebrity, the closest thing to a god amongst men in that town. And nobody's going to disagree with that. If Sid the Kid finds himself a way to get himself onto the Canadiens, the team that drafted his dad all those decades ago, either via a trade or in free agency at some time in the future, even if he's not that great, even if by the time 2027 rolls around and he's a free agent, then he signs a cheap deal with Montreal and he's not really anything above a 40-point player, which is kind of difficult to think about because it's like, hey, it's Sidney Crosby, he's that good. Even if he's not all too productive, just the star power, the story, the narrative there, it's powerful enough to make anybody get chills. So I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Derick Brassard and his commentary on BPM Sports Talk Radio about the Sidney Crosby Montreal situation. Do you think it's actually feasible here? Do you think it is a realistic outcome? If you had to label it, let's say scale of 0 to 10, what are the odds that Sidney Crosby to Montreal actually happens? I'm saying it's like a 2 out of 10, which is not high for sure, but it certainly is a lot higher than we might have anticipated, like, let's say a decade and a half ago. Sidney Crosby leaving Pittsburgh? No way. That's ridiculous. Why would anybody think that? Well, now it's 2025, their core is all old, and Crosby is one of the only guys that's actually still good. So I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Sid the Kid and Brassard's commentary on Sid potentially going to Montreal. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.